Welcome to Sleep Science Galaxy. This is not a place for hurry, not a place for worries, and it does not ask you to understand anything at all. All you need to do is be here and allow yourself to rest. Right now, let your shoulders soften. Breathe in slowly and breathe out gently. With each breath, you move one step farther away from the sounds of the day, from unfinished thoughts, from everything that does not need to be carried into sleep. Tonight, we will leave Earth. We will leave the familiar solar system behind. We drift slowly into the quiet space between the stars, where distant planets turn silently in the darkness, unhurried, undisturbed. This is a safe space for you to rest, a doorway opening into deep sleep, where science becomes gentle and the universe tells its story through silence. Extreme worlds. As we begin to drift away from the familiar safe zone of gentle planets, the universe does not rush to confront us with terror. It simply opens another door, quietly, into a realm of worlds that exist beyond intuition, not to frighten us, but to leave us momentarily still with wonder. There, the strange is not sharp, not violent. It feels like standing before an ocean at night, vast, deep, and so silent that you naturally soften your own breathing. There are planets not born to nurture life as we usually imagine it. They have no blue seas, no white clouds, no warm afternoon light. They are shaped by conditions so extreme they seem as though they could exist only in imagination. And yet, they are entirely real. They orbit distant stars with steady precision, obeying physical laws that favor no one, quietly doing their work in the immense universe. Not good, not bad, simply existing. There's a world which, if we only heard it described, we might think lies at the boundary where a planet begins to become a star. Its surface temperature is so high that familiar ideas like gas, clouds, or wind begin to lose their meaning. There, metal is no longer solid or cold. It evaporates. It dissolves into the atmosphere like mist. Light from its parent star does more than warm. It tears the atmosphere apart, stretching it behind the planet like a glowing tail, slowly drifting into space. A planet denied rest, locked forever in the gaze of its star, where day never ends and night never arrives. It sounds violent, but seen from afar, the scene is strangely calm. There's no roar, no collision, only light, heat, and the slow movement of matter gradually leaving a world too close to its sun. It is not in pain. It is simply following simple rules. Energy flows from strong to weak. Matter follows the pull of gravity. And within this harshness, there is a cool, almost meditative beauty, a reminder that the universe does not need to be gentle in order to be orderly. When we allow ourselves to observe such planets without judgment, without trying to compare them to Earth, the mind begins to slow. We stop searching for life. We stop asking, could we live there? We simply observe. And in that pure observation, the brain releases its tension, because there is no answer that needs to be found. Only a story being told through heat, light, and time. Farther out, in regions of space where the chemical makeup of star-forming clouds is different, the universe experiments with another arrangement. There, carbon is not merely the foundation of life, but the primary material of an entire world. When pressure is great enough, when time is long enough, carbon is no longer graphite or invisible molecules. It crystallizes. It rearranges itself into perfect structures, hard and enduring. So much so that we give them a very human name: diamond. The idea of a planet whose deep interior is made of massive carbon crystals sounds like a scientific fairy tale. But when we set aside the familiar sparkle that human culture assigns to diamonds, the picture changes completely. There are no lights, no hands to touch, no admiration, only darkness, crushing pressure, and silence stretching across billions of years. Diamonds there are not meant to be beautiful. They are simply the inevitable outcome of physics, a stable form that matter settles into when no other path remains. And it is precisely this lack of intention that brings a sense of safety. No purpose, no agenda, no observation. The universe is not trying to impress us, it is simply functioning. When we listen to stories of such worlds in a relaxed state, the mind begins to grasp something very deep. Not everything needs meaning in order to exist. A planet can be made of diamonds without anyone to admire it. A world can be hotter than a star without anyone setting foot upon it. And they are still complete in their own way. The feeling of strangeness that arises here is not a threat. It is like hearing a piece of music built from unfamiliar chords. At first, the brain pauses, curious. But then, when there is no climax, no shock, only a slow, steady rhythm, we begin to let ourselves drift. These extreme planets do not rush toward us. They are very far away. That distance is a buffer of safety, allowing us to observe without needing to react. In this state, the breath naturally deepens. Thoughts of work, of tomorrow, of responsibility begin to fade, because they have no place in the story of these worlds. Where temperatures vaporize metal or pressures turn carbon into crystal, there are no schedules, no notifications, no expectations. Only the patience of the universe. A patience humans rarely allow themselves to experience. And perhaps that is why extreme worlds can feel so relaxing. They are too different for us to project ourselves into them. We cannot imagine living there, and so we do not carry our worries with us. We become pure observers, drifting with the story as we drift with our breath. Each image is not meant to stimulate, but to expand, to remind the mind that reality is far wider than the daily loop of thought. As the journey continues, planets hotter than stars and diamond worlds cease to be dry scientific concepts. They become gentle symbols of infinite diversity, a whispered reminder that there is no single way to exist, no fixed model of what normal must be. Within their extremity, we find permission to loosen, to be imperfect, to simply be present. And as we lie still, listening to this story in the familiar darkness of the room, those distant worlds continue to turn, hot, heavy, silent. They do not know of us, and precisely because of that, they offer us a rare gift, the feeling of complete rest. There is nothing more to understand, nothing to remember, only allowing the universe to do what it has always done, and allowing sleep to arrive as a natural result of the deepest letting go. The sky of science fiction. As we gradually grow accustomed to worlds too hot to touch, too heavy to imagine, the mind begins to release its need to compare everything to Earth. Extreme planets no longer startle us with sudden awe. They become a low, steady background rhythm, like the distant hum of cosmic machinery running without rest. And within this newly found familiarity, the story gently turns in another direction, away from numbers of temperature and pressure toward the sky, toward light, and toward the way the universe paints scenes that humanity once dared to dream of only in fiction. There are mornings that do not begin with a single sun. Light arrives from two directions. Two separate sources move slowly across the sky, casting overlapping shadows that merge and separate, like two heartbeats that are never perfectly in sync. On such worlds, dawn is not a moment, but an extended process. When one star is still low, the other has already climbed high. When one light begins to soften, the other keeps the sky suspended between day and evening. There is no clear boundary between light and dark. Everything exists in a prolonged transition, where light never fully disappears. If we stand still and observe, we see that this sky is not chaotic at all. Despite having two suns, their movements follow orbits so precise they feel almost meditative. Each cycle is the result of billions of years of gravitational adjustment, until everything settles into its own stable rhythm. Science gives these systems special names, but when listening with a relaxed mind, we do not need labels. We only need to feel the slow rhythm of light and shadow, like a breath stretched longer than any human breath has ever been. Under this dual light, imagination is not forced to wander too far. It is gently guided by reality. Because worlds with two suns are not products of pure fantasy, but natural outcomes of binary stars, which are common throughout the galaxy. When a planet finds a position stable enough to orbit both stars, it does nothing more than continue turning. It does not know that humans once dreamed of twin sunsets in science fiction. It simply exists, and that existence allows our imagination to rest inside a dream that has a foundation. Farther still, the skies of some worlds do not wear gentle shades of blue. They may darken, shimmering with dull metallic tones, as though the atmosphere were mixed from unfamiliar materials. There, clouds are not made of water. The tiny particles suspended in the air are substances that on Earth we encounter only in furnaces or workshops. When temperatures rise high enough, they are no longer solid. They drift, gather, and then fall. Not rain, not snow, but streams of molten glass, blown sideways by the wind, slicing quietly across the sky like silent streaks of light. To the daytime mind, the idea of glass rain might trigger tension. But within the meditative state of this story, the image carries no threat. It feels like a natural phenomenon in a dream, beautiful, distant, unrelated to us. Those glass drops do not fall where we are lying. They fall on a planet hundreds of light years away, where no one stands beneath the sky to fear or to shield themselves. That distance transforms harshness into something purely to be observed. When we allow ourselves to see rain not as danger but as movement, the brain begins to change how it responds. It stops searching for threats. It begins to register rhythm. Rain falls, wind moves, matter shifts state. All of it unfolds in cosmic silence. No sound, no urgency. It is weather, but not weather designed for humans. It exists for itself, like music that does not require a listener. There are worlds where weather seems to follow no familiar logic at all. Winds can be strong enough to carry metal, sweeping it around the planet. Temperature does not change with seasons, but with fixed positions between an unchanging day and night. One half of the planet burns under starlight, the other sinks into eternal darkness. Between them lies a permanent twilight belt, where light is never overhead and darkness never fully descends. If we listen long enough, we realize that what we call illogical exists only when we try to impose our own rules onto a different reality. For the universe, nothing is illogical. There are only different conditions producing different outcomes. When we release the need to immediately understand, to immediately explain, unease dissolves quickly. In its place comes a softness of perception, like accepting that a dream does not need to make sense in order to flow. Here, science and imagination meet without conflict. Science provides a stable framework: gravity, orbits, atmospheric chemistry, thermodynamics. But the way these elements combine on each planet creates scenes far beyond human habit. When told in a slow voice, these scenes do not stimulate the brain toward analysis, but toward relaxation. They allow imagination to wander on a path paved with truth. In this state, the listener no longer tries to picture every detail precisely. They do not need to see each drop of glass rain or trace each path of the two suns. They only need the overall feeling: a different sky, a different rhythm of existence, a world that does not require humans to be complete. That feeling gently lifts the weight of the self, as if personal thoughts were only tiny particles drifting in a far larger atmosphere. And as the story continues, these science-supported dreamlike skies begin to do something very subtle. They expand the inner space of the listener. As that space widens, everyday worries are no longer large enough to fill the mind. They grow small, distant, and faint, like stars we can no longer distinguish once the light of two suns has filled the sky. In that moment, imagination is no longer an escape. It becomes a form of active rest. We are not running from reality. We are simply placing ourselves briefly in another reality, far enough away that tension cannot keep up. And while the body remains still, while the breath stays even, the mind has already begun to drift more slowly than thought. Worlds with two suns, rains that do not wet, skies that ignore seasons. All of them exist as stories told not to shock, but to soothe. They remind us that the universe is too vast for hurry. And within that vastness, we are allowed to become small, allowed not to understand everything, allowed simply to listen. As the story gently closes beneath that sky, there is no climax, no conclusion, only a vague but comforting sense that reality has more layers than we once believed, and that we do not need to control them all. We only need to lie still. Let those twin lights continue to move in imagination. Let distant rains keep falling where no one stands beneath them, and allow sleep to arrive as the natural result of no longer trying to understand, no longer trying to hold on, no longer trying to stay awake. The universe continues its story, and you, in this moment, only need to listen until the story gently dissolves into sleep. The infinite ocean and balance. As the sky with two sources of light slowly recedes, as rains that do not wet and rules once thought illogical become familiar, within the slow rhythm of the telling, the mind is no longer stimulated by strangeness. The unusual has completed its task, expanding the boundaries of perception. And the moment we stop trying to measure the universe against Earth's familiar standards, the story naturally softens, as if space itself recognizes that it is time to whisper rather than astonish. There, the planets no longer blaze or rage with violent storms. They are quieter, deeper, covered by oceans without shores, without a familiar horizon for the human eye to cling to. From afar, there are no continents, no greens of forests, no browns of land and stone. Only water. Water extending so far that the idea of the other side no longer exists. A world where the ocean is not a feature of the planet, but the planet itself. These oceans are unlike Earth's seas, where waves break against shores and tides rise and fall in familiar cycles. They are far deeper. So deep that if we try to imagine them, imagination soon lets go. Near the surface, the water may be calm, reflecting starlight in slow, shimmering patterns. But the deeper one goes, the pressure increases without negotiation. Water no longer behaves as the gentle liquid we know. It compresses, changes structure, becoming forms that are unfamiliar. Part water, part ice, part something else we have never touched. And yet, within this unfamiliarity, the story brings an unexpected sense of peace, perhaps because oceans always suggest rhythm. On Earth or on some distant world, water moves according to soft, continuous laws, without sharp edges. When we hear of a planet entirely wrapped in water, the mind naturally slows, as if drifting on the sea during a windless night. There is no clear destination, but there is also no reason to worry. On some such worlds, the planet does not rotate in the way we expect. One side always faces its parent star, immersed in endless light. The other remains forever in darkness. There is no sunrise to anticipate, no sunset to mourn. Time, in the familiar human sense, becomes blurred. But rather than creating a lifeless world, this arrangement opens something very special in between. Between light that never fades and darkness that never lifts, there exists a narrow yet continuous band encircling the planet. Here, light is always angled, never harsh, never gone. Temperatures are not extreme, not frozen, not boiling, just enough. A fragile yet enduring balance, sustained not by change, but by prolonged stability itself. As the story reaches this boundary region, the voice seems to lower naturally. There are no violent or startling images anymore. Only the subtlety of a place belonging neither fully to day nor to night. A place where, if there is wind, it blows evenly, without gusts. If there are clouds, they drift slowly, in no hurry to disperse or gather. And if there is an ocean, its surface reflects starlight at a permanent angle, forming an endless ribbon of light across the water. Here, for the first time in the journey, a new question appears. Very softly. Not, what is it, but could it be? Not a claim, only a possibility. Could it be that within those deep oceans, in layers gently warmed by the planet's internal heat, chemical reactions complex enough to sustain life might exist? Could there be ecosystems adapted to slanted light and stable temperatures within that never-changing twilight band? The story does not answer. And it is precisely this lack of an answer that allows the mind to rest. Because instead of being pushed toward conclusions, we are simply invited to imagine, gently. Not to imagine creatures, forms, or civilizations. Only to imagine the possibility that life does not need to resemble us in order to deserve existence. Here, science no longer plays the role of a dry explainer. It becomes a calm companion, pointing out that water, heat, and time are common ingredients throughout the universe. If they exist together, even in very different ways, then wondering about life is no longer fanciful dreaming, but a natural thought. Light as a wave, unforced. In this rhythm, the listener begins to feel a subtle shift within. Strangeness gives way to a hazy familiarity. Oceans, no matter how alien, carry a primal memory for humanity. We are born from water. Our bodies are largely water. When we hear of vast water worlds, something deep within collective memory is stirred, quietly, indistinctly, yet enough to create a feeling of safety. And then, the idea of life is no longer a goal to be sought, but a possibility allowed to coexist with silence. There may be life. There may not be. Neither changes the beauty of these worlds. They continue to turn. Water continues to move, light continues to slant, without needing anyone to witness it. As we lie listening to this story in a quiet room, the balance of those distant planets begins to reflect inward. Thoughts that pull us toward the past or push us toward the future gradually soften. The mind finds its own twilight band, a place where it does not need to be fully awake nor fully asleep. A safe transition zone, where everything is allowed to drift. Perhaps this is the quiet power of infinite oceans and planets that forever face the light. They teach us that balance does not always come from constant change. That sometimes balance comes from staying still, from remaining in the right place long enough for all impulses to settle. And as the story continues to drift, those water worlds are no longer distant points on an astronomical map. They become a slow breath, a mental space where we can anchor ourselves before sinking deeper into sleep. There is no need for awe, no need for analysis, only the feeling that somewhere in this vast universe, there are places that are not too hot, not too cold, not too bright, not too dark. And that thought alone is enough to let the body soften a little more, to let sleep draw nearer, gentle as waves touching a shore that never appears. Giants close to their stars. As the gentle sense of balance from the infinite oceans continues to spread, as the idea of eternal twilight bands has helped the mind find a soft anchor, the story does not abruptly change direction. It only tilts slightly, like an ocean current meeting warmer water. The calm does not disappear, but in the distance, the light grows harsher, gravity heavier, and the breath of the universe seems to deepen. This is no longer a place of habitability, but a reminder that the universe was not created to accommodate humanity. And even so, it tells its story in a slow, low voice, quiet enough for us to listen without drawing ourselves inward. There are giant planets that do not reside far from their stars, not hidden away in cold darkness. They move very close, so close that light and heat are no longer evenly spread, but become a relentless potoke pouring into the atmosphere. Seen from afar, these worlds appear massive, rounded like slow-moving giants. But proximity changes everything. Starlight does not merely illuminate, it stretches the surrounding space, forcing the planet to reveal all of its fragility. In such places, the atmosphere does not remain still. It swells, heats up, and begins to leave the planet little by little, not through an explosion, not in a dramatic instant, but through a slow leakage, unfolding over millions of years. Light atoms are heated until they no longer have the patience to stay. They drift away, forming faint streams trailing behind the planet, like breath escaping into a cold night. From a distance, this movement is remarkably beautiful. Steady even, almost meditative. A planet exhaling itself. The feeling that arises when listening to these worlds is not fear, but quiet respect. Because here, the universe does not hide its power. It does not try to soften itself, nor does it need to display excess. It simply allows everything to unfold according to the laws written into the deepest structure of space and time. The planet moves too close. Light heats it. Matter responds. Transformation begins. No mistake, no punishment, only consequence. Among these close-in worlds, there are planets that absorb so much light that they reflect almost nothing at all. They are so dark that, placed beside empty space, the difference is barely noticeable. Light falls into their atmospheres and vanishes. No reflection, no scattering. Not because of darkness, but because of an astonishing level of absorption. As if the planet has chosen not to tell its story through light, but through silence. When the mind has already been guided through gentle oceans and balanced twilight zones, the image of a world darker than coal no longer overwhelms. It feels like stepping into a familiar dark room, one where sight is unnecessary to feel safe. The darkness here is not threatening. It simply reminds us that light is not the only way to exist. There are places in the universe that choose to keep everything to themselves, absorbing, holding, offering no response. In the slow rhythm of the narration, this darkness becomes a soothing substance. There are no sharp details, no sudden motions, only the sense that the universe, in all its vastness, also contains corners that are not radiant, not sparkling. And those corners are valid too. They do not need illumination to have worth. Returning to the giants near their stars, the contrast between their immense size and their fragile fate creates a very particular feeling. We are used to thinking that larger means stronger, that great mass brings stability. But the universe does not follow human intuition. A planet may be many times larger than Earth, yet when placed too close to a colossal energy source, it must still yield. Gravity holds on to some part of it, but heat and radiation persist, patiently doing their work, moment by moment. The way the story describes the stripping of an atmosphere carries no violence, no sharp language, only dissolution, like fog meeting morning sunlight, like vapor rising from the surface of the sea. These images keep the mind from moving toward tension. Instead, it registers a natural process, slow, irreversible, but not tragic. Everything in the universe is changing. Some changes are loud, others unfold in deep silence. As we hear of planets gradually losing their atmospheres, a very small part of us may recognize a familiar metaphor, not to think deeply, only to feel. That sometimes letting go does not happen because of weakness, but because circumstances have shifted. That some things cannot be held forever, even if they were once essential to what we were. The universe does not grieve. It does not store memory. But humans, listening in a relaxed state, may find a faint resonance, just enough to release a little more. The presence of giants close to their stars also highlights the diversity of planetary existence. Not all worlds seek safe zones. Not all remain at comfortable distances. Some live very near the edge, where energy and gravity are in constant tension. And they still exist, at least for spans of time that are long by human standards. That existence has no purpose beyond demonstrating that the universe has many ways of arranging matter. Within the context of a sleep story, these details are not reminders of danger, but of scale. When we place ourselves, with our small worries, next to processes lasting millions of years, the mind naturally recalibrates its emotional scale. Personal concerns, which feel large when we are alone with them, begin to shrink, not because they do not matter, but because they do not need to be resolved right now. The voice of the story keeps its steady pace, never accelerating. The giants do not rush toward the listener. They turn slowly, endure starlight, lose their lightest layers of gas, yet keep their form long enough for the story to be told. There is no explosive climax, only a gentle tension, like listening to strong wind outside while remaining still in a warm room. Knowing the world beyond is not gentle, and also knowing that you are safe. On a deeper level, these dark and heated planets serve as a wordless reminder that the gentleness of the universe does not come from constant kindness, but from consistency. Starlight heats. Matter responds. Time allows everything to unfold slowly. There is no whim. And it is precisely this consistency that provides a stable ground for the human mind to rest upon. Even when the story speaks of harshness, after drifting with the rhythm of the narration long enough, the giants near their stars no longer feel foreign. They become part of a larger picture, one in which every world, gentle or severe, has its place. No planet is wrong. No orbit is meaningless. All contribute to a richness that keeps the universe from ever repeating itself. And then, in a very subtle moment, the body responds before the mind notices. The breath slows, muscles loosen, thoughts no longer cling to detail, but drift with the overall feeling of the story. A soft peak has passed without leaving a ripple. Only a deep, low foundation, ready for what comes next. The giants remain there, near their stars, hot, dark, gradually losing their atmospheres. But the listener no longer needs to follow them. They have fulfilled their role, to remind us that the universe is vast, powerful, and not designed to please anyone. And strangely, that realization brings relaxation, because when we accept that not everything revolves around us, we are allowed to release the burden of control, of needing to understand, to intervene, to manage. The story continues to drift on, leaving behind harsh light and deep shadow, carrying a new breath, slow and steady. And within that breath, sleep begins to draw closer, not as a destination, but as a natural state, arriving when all tension has been set down, when the universe has spoken enough, and when the mind is ready to listen in silence. The Wanderers. As the harsh light of nearby stars gradually fades behind us, as the blazing giants have completed their role of reminding us that the universe is neither gentle nor accommodating, the story does not continue upward. It begins to lower its voice, as if, after facing power directly, we are invited to turn away from the light, step out of familiar orbits, and move into a space where there is no longer a center, no clear point of reference. There is no sunrise to wait for, and no sunset to bring closure. Only slow movement within deep darkness, and a stillness wide enough for all thoughts to naturally settle. There are planets that no longer belong to any star. They do not orbit a source of light, are not steadily warmed, and receive no day-night rhythm by which to measure time. They drift, not in haste, but in a wandering that lasts millions, sometimes billions of years. Seen from very far away, they resemble enormous grains of dust, silently crossing the emptiness between stars, leaving no trace, emitting no clear signal. They were not born to be abandoned. They were simply pushed free during the early collisions and upheavals of planetary systems, and from that moment on, they continued to exist in a different way. The solitude of these worlds carries no sense of tragedy. It is unlike human loneliness, which is bound to the desire to be seen, to be answered. Here, there is no desire at all, only matter and inertia. A planet without a sun does not feel deprived of light. It simply does not have light. The darkness surrounding it is not an enemy, but a natural, enveloping, stable state. And it is precisely this stability that creates a very deep, very even stillness, one perfectly suited for the human mind to relax. Within that darkness, time becomes something else entirely. There are no markers to distinguish today from yesterday, this year from the next. If the planet once had an atmosphere, once retained residual heat from its formation, it may keep that warmth for a very long time. Deep within. Not the warmth of sunlight, but a slow, lingering heat, unhurried in its fading. And in those deep layers, matter continues to move, very gently, like the final threads of thought before a person slips into deep sleep. When listening to these wanderers, the listener is not stimulated by events or motion. Nothing happens in a dramatic sense, and for that very reason, The story begins to function more like background sound than a sequence of images. It is like distant wind or a train moving underground, steady, unobtrusive, demanding no attention. The brain, accustomed to reacting to change and surprise, finds no reason to stay alert. It begins to loosen, allowing scattered thoughts to drift past without attachment. Within this wandering, not everything is completely dark. Some worlds, though starless, still carry a very discreet kind of beauty. In the atmospheres of certain giant planets, minerals that on Earth we associate with jewelry and brilliance exist instead as clouds. Not to sparkle, not to be seen, but simply because temperature and pressure allow them to crystallize at certain altitudes. These clouds drift slowly, reflecting only the faintest remnants of surrounding light, creating muted, deep hues, more like memories than images. The idea of such clouds does not excite the mind. It evokes something different, the sense of beauty that does not require a witness. There is no sunlight striking them to heighten their colors, no eyes lifted upward in admiration. And yet, the clouds still exist, still form, still dissolve according to their own cycles. It is a very quiet lesson in unconditional existence, a whisper that not everything beautiful needs to be seen in order to have value. As the story reaches these details, the voice naturally slows even further. Sentences grow longer, breaths deepen, because here there is little left to explain. Science has done its work. It has shown us that such planets can exist, that mineral clouds can form under certain conditions, that the space between stars is not entirely empty. Then science steps back, making room for contemplation. Not to speculate, but to feel solitude not as lack, but as spaciousness. When there is no sun, no fixed orbit, no rendezvous point, the planet is not bound to any schedule. It does not need to wake up, does not need to move in cycles, does not need to respond to light or darkness. It simply drifts. And in that drifting, there is no tension. If humans could learn even a small fraction of this state, sleep might arrive more easily. Listening to worlds without suns, part of the mind begins to dim its own internal light. Thoughts that revolve around tomorrow, around responsibility, around unfinished tasks, gradually lose relevance. They are like small noises in a space too vast to echo. And so they dissolve on their own, without being pushed away. There is a very subtle comfort in knowing that the universe contains places that do not orient themselves toward light at all. That not everything needs a center to revolve around. That existence can be steady and enduring even without warmth or attention. This comfort is not sharply emotional. It does not make us happy or sad. It makes us lighter, just a little lighter than when the story began. In this state, images of mineral clouds, prolonged darkness, and purposeless motion begin to blend into a single feeling. A feeling like closing your eyes and no longer trying to see anything. Instead, you simply notice that you are breathing, that the space around you is wide, that nothing is being asked of you in this moment. The wanderers of the universe are not searching for a destination. They have no end point, no clear beginning in the human story. And for that very reason, they are ideal companions for sleep. They do not urge. They do not pull us forward. They do not hold us back. They simply drift and invite us to drift with them, very gently. As the story continues, those planets keep moving silently through the void, carrying faint clouds, carrying residual warmth, carrying an unbroken stillness. The listener no longer needs to follow them. There is no need to remember names, no need to understand trajectories. only to allow that cosmic solitude to do one very simple thing: to clear space in the mind. And within that cleared space, sleep begins to have room to form, not as something to be achieved, but as a natural consequence of letting go of light, letting go of motion, letting go of questions. All that remains is a very faint sense of self, drifting within a universe wide enough to ask for nothing more. Quiet hope. As the wanderers drift farther into deep darkness, as the calm sense of solitude has cleared the inner sky, the story does not end in that endless night. At the edge of the dark, very gently, a subtle change appears. Not a sudden flare of light, not a radiant dawn, but just enough brightness to notice that space continues to open into other possibilities, like eyes adjusting to night, where a single small point of light is enough to orient without glare, without disturbing the calm that has just been reached. Somewhere in the galaxy, there are worlds not large enough to become gas giants, and not so small that fragility overtakes them. They carry a just right size, enough to hold an atmosphere, enough for gravity to embrace the surface, enough for time to do its work slowly. When science encounters such planets, it does not celebrate, it does not declare. It simply tilts its head, paying a little closer attention. Because here, for the first time after a series of harsh and solitary worlds, conditions begin to evoke a very faint sense of familiarity. These worlds are not perfect. They are not designed to be another version of Earth. But in the way they exist, certain elements seem to cooperate gently. Gravity slightly stronger, enough to keep a thick, stable atmosphere. Geology perhaps less chaotic, not torn apart by constant collisions. Time moving slowly enough for surfaces to settle, for long cycles to unfold without violent interruption. Hearing this does not excite the mind with grand promises. It simply opens a small space for the possibility of existence. What stands out is not the question, is there life? But the feeling that if life were to arise, it would not need to struggle constantly to survive. No need to endure extreme temperatures, no need to flee relentless light or eternal darkness. Only to adapt to a steady rhythm, one where day and night may differ greatly from Earth, but not so harshly as to break everything. That thought does not quicken the heart, it deepens the breath. There are planets that orbit their stars so quickly that a year passes faster than a day. Light barely has time to change its angle before one full orbit is complete. Time, there, is compressed. Yet rather than creating chaos, the precision of the orbit brings another kind of stability. Everything happens fast, but repeats exactly, like a clock running faster than usual, yet never missing a beat. Within that rhythm, if there is an atmosphere, if there is a surface, they learn to adapt to constant repetition without surprise. At the opposite end of the time spectrum, there are worlds so slow that a single season lasts a lifetime. Light shifts gradually, temperature rises and falls not by weeks or months, but by centuries. These planets do not hurry. They allow every process to unfold with absolute patience. If life exists there, it would not race. It would be slow, enduring, and perhaps very stable. The thought of such rhythms does not occupy the mind. It is like watching the hand of a clock move so slowly that the brain stops tracking each motion. In both cases, fast or slow, the important thing is not speed, but consistency. The universe seems to whisper that stability does not come from sameness, but from reliability. When hearing about worlds with unusual yet stable orbits, the listener no longer feels pulled toward familiar standards. Earth is no longer the only measure. It becomes one example among many ways matter and energy can arrange themselves into environments that are not overly harsh. It is here that hope appears, but without a clear shape. It does not say that humanity will find a new home. It does not promise blue oceans or clear skies. It quietly suggests that the universe may be more generous than we once thought, in very subdued ways. That there may be places where life, if it emerges, does not have to constantly fight to endure. And that thought alone, faint as it is enough to soften deeper worries about the fragility of everything. In the relaxed state of the story, this hope does not awaken the brain with excitement. It creates no concrete images to hold on to. It is like light filtering through thick clouds, not bright enough to dazzle, but enough to remind that the sky above is not entirely dark. That light asks for no attention. It simply exists, allowing the listener to drift deeper without fear of losing direction. The reflection here is deeply human, yet not heavy. Knowing that there may be planets more stable, gentler than Earth in certain ways, does not require comparison or judgment. It simply allows us to see that our world is not the sole exception of balance. This does not diminish Earth's value. On the contrary, it places Earth within a broader picture, one where life is not a solitary miracle, but a natural possibility when conditions allow. By this point, the listener's mind is in a very particular state, no longer tense from extreme images, not entirely empty as when drifting in the darkness of the wanderers. It rests in a gentle light, clear enough to feel safe, soft enough to avoid thought. This is the state many people reach just before deep sleep, when the day's final thoughts grow light and no longer cling. The story of these just right worlds does not end with a declaration. It does not say humanity's future lies there. It makes no claims about life. It leaves only a quiet sense that the universe is neither indifferent nor indulgent. It is simply rich, and within that richness, there is room for harsh places, lonely places, and places that may be a little gentler. As the listener lies still, letting the voice continue to drift, this soft light performs an important task. It reassures the part of the brain still awake that there is no need for vigilance. No new danger is emerging. No great surprise awaits. Everything is moving along a stable trajectory, fast or slow, near or far. This reassurance needs no direct words. It seeps through the rhythm, through the way images rest beside one another without collision. And then, very naturally, attention begins to leave the specific content. The listener no longer follows each world, each possibility. Instead, they follow their own breath, or nothing at all. The story has fulfilled its purpose, guiding the mind from the deep darkness of solitude, through a zone of just enough light, preparing it to sink further still, to where there are no images, no questions, only pure rest. Hope here is not a destination. It is a very light bridge, and once crossed, there is no need to look back. Sleep waits ahead, not as a reward, but as the body's natural state when all stimulation has softened, when the universe has finished the part of the story that needed telling, and when the mind is ready to release itself into the safe vastness of not needing to know. The vast universe egg in numbers. When the final gentle light of just enough possibilities has finished its reassuring work, when the thought of worlds that might be softer than Earth has settled like a long breath, the story naturally expands, not deeper into emotion, but wider into space. like lying still in the dark and realizing the ceiling is no longer a limit. The mind begins to loosen its familiar boundaries. Specific images gradually dissolve, giving way to an enveloping sense that there is far more than what we have just heard, far more than what we have ever imagined. Somewhere out there, not one or two worlds, but countless ones. They do not line up. They do not wait to be named. They exist simultaneously, quietly, each planet a story of its own, yet none needing to be fully told to prove its presence. When science begins to realize this, it does not announce it loudly. It simply expands the map, little by little, adding small dots, faint orbits, barely perceptible rhythms of light. And then, in a very quiet moment, we realize that there are so many of these dots that they can no longer be counted in the usual way. The idea of large numbers often wakes the human mind, because the brain tends to measure, compare, and control. But within this slow rhythm of storytelling, numbers are no longer something to remember. They become a feeling. The feeling that every star we see in the night sky does not stand alone, that around many of them, worlds are turning steadily, without display, without signals, simply existing. And as this thought spreads, the sense of self begins to shrink naturally, without force. There is a very strange beauty in how humans discover these distant worlds. Not by looking directly, not through clear images, but through changes so subtle that without patience, they would be missed. A star dims slightly for a moment, then brightens again. A distant light wavers, as if someone gently touched its heartbeat. These signs are so delicate that they must repeat hundreds, thousands of times before we can be sure they are not chance. And it is precisely this delicacy that makes the story feel gentle. In a relaxed state, the image of small shadows gliding across a star carries no drama. It is like noticing that your breathing has slowed a little since the beginning. No major event, only a very slight change. Just enough to realize that a world is passing by, far away, at exactly the right moment, with near-perfect precision. The light dips briefly, then returns. A blink of the universe. Elsewhere, a planet's presence is not revealed by a shadow, but by a tremor. The star does not remain completely still. It wobbles ever so slightly, like someone standing on a boat on calm water. The motion is so small that only the most sensitive instruments can detect it. But once detected, once those tiny movements are placed into a long sequence, a rhythm appears. Not a rhythm of sound, but of gravity. A slow dance, where star and planet circle a shared point. No one entirely still, no one entirely leading. When hearing about these methods of discovery, the mind does not need to understand the details. It only needs to feel that the universe does not reveal its secrets loudly. It whispers. It leaves the faintest traces and waits for patience. That patience, when conveyed in a low, steady voice, has a powerful effect on someone listening at night. It teaches the brain that not everything needs to be resolved immediately, that some answers arrive only when we are sufficiently still. The sense of vastness does not come from imagining distances of hundreds of light years. It comes from realizing that what we once thought was rare is, in fact, common. The planets are not unusual exceptions, but a natural outcome of star formation. Matter spins, dust gathers, gravity does its work, and worlds are born. No special conditions required, no attention needed, only time. As this thought settles, the self, so accustomed to placing itself at the center, begins to soften. Not because it is denied, but because it is placed in proper proportion. We do not disappear. we simply become smaller. Small like a breath in a dark room. Small like a point of light in a star-filled picture. And within this shrinking, there is a deep relief. Because when we are no longer the center, we no longer have to carry the responsibility of keeping everything running. The story of the vast number of worlds does not need to be told through overwhelm. It is told through rhythm. One world turns, another passes in front of its star. Another makes its star tremble just slightly. All of this happens at once, in different places, without collision, without crowding. This parallel existence, when felt rather than analyzed, creates a very stable stillness, a foundation on which personal thoughts no longer echo so loudly. There is a very subtle moment when the listener realizes that no numbers need to be remembered. No need to know how many worlds have been discovered. No need to know which method works best. All those details have completed their task, proving that abundance is real. After that, they can dissolve like small waves merging into a larger ocean of feeling. In that moment, the universe is no longer a scientific concept, but a mental space. A space wide enough to hold both the known and the unknown without pressure. The listener is not invited to explore further, to become more curious. Instead, they are invited to rest within that vastness itself. To let the thought of "there is so much" dissolve the need to hold on to each individual thing. As the self grows smaller, sleep becomes easier to reach, because much insomnia comes from the mind placing itself at the center of every problem. When that center dissolves, not through force, but through expansion, the problems dissolve with it. They do not vanish. They simply no longer fill the entire frame of awareness. The way science listens to distant light, the way it patiently waits for the smallest oscillations, quietly becomes a deep lesson in meditation. Not through advice, but through example. That we can know more by looking less. That we can understand more deeply by not rushing. And that we can discover countless new worlds without ever leaving stillness. As the story continues to drift, the listener no longer follows individual planets. The faint dots on the imagined map merge together, forming a dense field of stars. No beginning, no end, only an ongoing presence, too vast to be held by thought. And it is precisely this inability to grasp it all that allows the mind to let go. In this state, sleep is no longer something to achieve. It is something that happens when attention stops narrowing, stops centering on the self. The story of the vast universe and its countless worlds has done its work, moving the listener away from the center, placing them in a space large enough for all tension to become insignificant. And as breathing slows, as numbers lose their meaning, as distant light becomes only a faint sensation in the background of awareness, the listener drifts into sleep, not as a leap, but as a seamless continuation. The universe continues to expand. Planets continue to turn. Light continues to tremble softly. And within that steady motion, there's nothing left to follow. Only rest, calm and secure, in an inner world that has become wide enough to no longer hold tightly to anything at all. Time and fragility. When the sense of vastness has grown wide enough for the self to dissolve, when the idea of countless worlds turning in silence has loosened the mind's grip on numbers, the story naturally slows by another measure. Not because there is nothing left to tell, but because a different current is beginning to surface. If space was the main presence before, now, very quietly, time steps forward, not into the spotlight, not announcing itself, only appearing like a longer than usual breath, enough to remind us that everything we have heard does not only exist somewhere, but also exists for a certain length of time. Somewhere in the universe, there are planets slowly losing the thin veil that surrounds them. Not through a violent moment, not because of a dramatic collision, only light. Light arriving steadily, patiently, year after year. It warms the atmosphere, sets molecules moving faster. And then, little by little, they overcome the weak pull holding them in place and drift outward, dissolving into space. No one witnesses the process in its entirety. There is no clear marker to say, this is where it began, or this is where it ended. Only slow, continuous change. Almost impossible to notice unless viewed from very far away, across a very long span of time. Hearing about this evaporation, the mind does not feel loss. Perhaps because it is told without sorrow. It resembles mist fading as the sun rises, or vapor lifting from the sea on a quiet morning. There is no sense of being taken from, only a shift of state. A planet once able to hold its air, and then, in time, no longer able to do so. Not because it failed, but because the surrounding conditions changed. Time, in its role, does not rush. It does not destroy. It simply allows everything to move toward its next natural point. Elsewhere, planets are not shaped by a single source of light. They exist within more complex systems, where multiple stars coexist, pull, and illuminate in different rhythms. The sky there is never entirely stable. Light arrives from several directions, casting overlapping shadows that merge and separate. Orbits must balance carefully to avoid being torn apart. And within this fragile balance, time becomes the deciding factor. Not every arrangement lasts. Some persist only briefly by cosmic standards, then dissolve, making way for other configurations. Listening to such systems does not create anxiety. It feels like watching an old clock in motion, knowing it will one day stop, yet still appreciating the beauty of each present tick. Planets circling multiple suns do not live in chaos. They exist within a complex order, where every orbit is a continuous negotiation with gravity. That negotiation, unfolding over millions of years, carries a depth of stillness far removed from the hurried rhythm of human life. Then the story moves farther still, to places where light is no longer young. There are stars that have passed their most brilliant phase. They no longer burn fuel with fierce intensity. They shrink, cool, and become dense, dim cores, holding within them the memory of billions of years of shining. And around these remnants, planets continue to turn. Not lifeless debris, but worlds that have adapted to a different kind of light. Softer, cooler, stable in their own way. The image of planets orbiting dead stars does not feel bleak. It carries a philosophical calm. Like a garden in late autumn where colors no longer burst, yet structure remains. Time here is not a destroyer, but a patient storyteller. It allows a star to live through its full cycle, then step quietly into the background. While planets continue their journey, carrying traces of what once was. Listening to these worlds at night, the human mind begins to reshape its understanding of fragility. Fragility no longer means weakness. It becomes a natural state of anything that exists for long enough. Atmospheres are fragile. Orbits are fragile. Light is fragile. And precisely because of this fragility, change, adaptation, and continuation in other forms are possible. Nothing remains unchanged long enough to become absolute. And instead of creating unease, this realization brings a gentle release. Time, told in this way, is not a current that sweeps everything away. It feels like deep water, flowing so slowly that the surface appears almost still. Change happens below, quietly, without urgency or demand. This sensation is familiar to the moment just before sleep, when the body is still present. But awareness has begun to loosen its hold on clear markers of the present. Hearing about planets losing their atmospheres, about complex star systems, about worlds circling fading light, the listener is not pulled toward the question of what happens next, because the answer is already understood. Time will continue its work. No prediction needed. No worry required. Everything will transform in ways the present does not need to grasp. And releasing the need to know in advance brings a deep calm to the mind. At a deeper level, the story touches something profoundly human, without naming it. That our own existence, like that of those planets, unfolds within a flow far longer than a single lifetime. That some things we hold today may not remain at another point in time, not because of failure, but because this is how time moves. Placed within the vast context of the universe, this thought does not feel tragic. It feels liberating. It allows us to stop demanding absolute permanence from everything. As this perspective settles in, the rhythm of the story slows even more. Images lose sharpness. They blur and merge like stars when eyes begin to close. The listener no longer follows individual details or worlds. They sense only one thing: that everything is moving within time and nothing needs to be held onto right now. Time becomes a quiet background, no longer emphasized. It is present in the way atmospheres thin, in the way star systems rearrange, in the way light changes as stars age. But it is also present in the listener's breathing, slower, deeper, more even. These two streams of time, the universes and the bodies, begin to align without effort. And in this alignment, fragility no longer triggers alertness. It becomes a soft reminder that nothing needs to be perfect or eternal to have value. That existing for a while is enough. Those planets do not know they are losing anything. They simply continue to turn. And we, listening to this story in our own safe darkness, are allowed to do the same in the simplest way. To breathe, to listen, and then to gently let ourselves fall into sleep. The story does not end with a conclusion. It opens into a longer silence than before. Within that silence, time is no longer something to think about, but something to drift with. And when thoughts grow too heavy to carry into sleep, they naturally fall away, making room for deep rest. A place where nothing more needs to be known, because time, like the universe itself, will remain. Continuing its story, very slowly, very quietly, even after we have fallen fully asleep. The universe's exceptions. When time has become a background current, when the feeling of fragility no longer meets resistance in the mind, but is gently accepted, the story tilts once more, very slightly, into another direction. Not to expand further, and not to dig deeper, but to loosen the final thing still clinging to awareness. The need for everything to make sense. Like lying in the dark for a long while, no longer following the breath, yet noticing a small habit of the mind, still wanting to arrange, to understand, to name what has just been heard. At this moment, the universe seems to smile very softly at that habit. It does not argue. It does not deny. It simply offers a few light, strange examples as a reminder that order does not always need to be perfect. There are worlds that move in ways that cause familiar models to pause, not because they are wrong, but because they tell a different story. a story that does not need to be fully explained in order to exist. Somewhere far away, there are planets that do not travel in the same direction as the star that formed them. While most matter in a star's system rotates together, following the momentum of the original cloud, these worlds take the opposite path. Not as an act of rebellion, but as a trace of a more complex past, gravitational pulls, ancient encounters, early disturbances when everything was still unsettled. And that orbit remains, uncorrected, unapologetic. Hearing about this reversed motion, the mind no longer strains to ask, why? After traveling through stories of long time spans and slow transformation, that question softens on its own. It does not demand an immediate answer. It simply notes that some movements persist, even when they defy expectation. And in that noting, the brain is allowed to rest from the task of making everything tidy. The same is true in intensely heated atmospheres, where temperatures rise high enough to dissolve what on Earth we consider solid and firm. Matter no longer behaves according to familiar intuition. Metals do not stay locked in rock. They vaporize, rise, and condense into strange clouds. Not soft, not white, not light, just dense hazes of iron, titanium, elements once learned as heavy and rigid, now drifting like mist. This image does not need to be seen clearly. It needs no color, no detail. Only the knowledge that somewhere, a sky is made not of water or dust, but of substances we usually associate with the ground. That thought does not raise the heartbeat. It lowers the need for sharp distinctions. Sky and ground in the universe are not always separated as they are in everyday experience. And as that boundary softens, so do the boundaries in the mind. There are worlds that cause scientists to pause for a long time before deciding where they belong in classification systems. They are not fully planets in the usual sense, yet not quite stars either. They exist at the edge of definition, where concepts begin to lose their sharpness. They persist, emitting a little heat, holding a little matter close, yet refusing to settle neatly into any single category. The existence of such exceptions does not weaken science. It humbles it. And when that humility is conveyed in a low, unhurried voice, it has a deep effect on the listener. It says, without saying directly, that it is not necessary to understand everything in order to feel at ease. That some things exist perfectly well without being precisely named, and that not fully understanding is not a failure, but a natural state when facing a universe far larger than human capacity to define. As the story moves through these rule-bending worlds, the mind releases another layer of control, the layer that wants to predict, the layer that wants one rule to fit all cases, the layer that believes that with enough information, everything will become neat. But the universe, very gently, shows that neatness is not the ultimate goal. Existence is. Strangely, this realization does not create chaos in the mind. It creates a profound calm. Because the part of the brain that works hardest during the day is the part that organizes, explains, anticipates. When that part is allowed to rest, inner space becomes wider and quieter. Exceptions stop being troubling. They become evidence that the world does not need a single mold to continue functioning. At a very subtle level, the story whispers something deeply familiar, yet rarely spoken. That perfect order is not a requirement for peace. That reversed orbits, metal clouds, and definition-defying worlds can exist. And the whole can still be harmonious in a different, less rigid way. And if the universe allows such flexibility in its structure, then the human mind can allow the same. hearing about these exceptions late at night, when the body is tired and the breath has slowed. The brain no longer wants to hold more information. It receives only the feeling that not every question needs to be answered before sleep, that it is not necessary to know why some planets move backward or why metal can float in the sky. Those questions can coexist with rest. They do not need solutions for sleep to arrive. There is a great release in realizing that not following the rules does not mean wrong. It simply means our rules are not wide enough. And when we stop trying to widen them right now, when we allow ourselves to remain in not knowing, sleep becomes much easier. Because sleep does not require complete logic. It requires only the sense of safety that nothing needs to be handled immediately. Here, the story does not try to teach a lesson. It places the listener in a state where rigid concepts have softened, where right and wrong matter less than what is. Those worlds are what they are. They orbit backward, they carry metal clouds, they slip past categories. And the universe does not rush to correct them. It allows them to exist, to be observed, and to continue. As the mind absorbs this spirit, the urge to understand everything dissolves. The listener no longer tries to remember details. They no longer need to assemble earlier parts into a complete picture. The picture is already large enough, soft enough to remain incomplete. And in that softness, the brain enters a state ideal for deep sleep. Exceptions in this story no longer stand out. They become a very gentle background melody, reminding us that the world does not operate like a problem awaiting a final solution. It flows, with bends, eddies, reversals, and still continues. As that flow becomes familiar, the listener stops resisting release, stops trying to follow the narrative. The voice continues, but awareness retreats. Images dissolve. Concepts sink into the background. Only a quiet sense remains that one does not need to understand the universe in order to rest within it. At this moment, sleep does not arrive as an event. It arrives as permission. Permission not to know. Permission not to control. Permission for exceptions to exist without explanation. And when that permission is given, softly, deeply, the listener drifts into sleep like a planet drifting through space, without instruction, without destination, simply continuing along its path, within a universe wide enough to ask for nothing more. A gentle philosophy of life. When the exceptions have softened the need to understand everything, when the mind has grown accustomed to the idea that the universe does not require perfect order in order to function smoothly, the story naturally moves into an even more delicate space. No longer a question of orbits or matter, but a very ancient, very light question, so light that holding it too tightly would make it disappear. It is the question of life. Not life as we know it, not life to be found or possessed, but life as an open possibility, existing somewhere within this vast expanse, in ways the human imagination has only brushed against at the edges. In this state, the story does not try to persuade. It does not claim that life certainly exists elsewhere, nor does it deny that possibility. It simply places the listener in a very humble position, where we look at the universe and realize that what we call life may be only one of many ways matter and energy organize themselves. On Earth, life is familiar with liquid water, with carbon, with chains of chemical reactions we have learned by heart. But the universe has never signed a contract with those conditions. It has made no promise that everywhere must resemble our home. Told in a slow, low voice, this idea does not make the listener feel lost. On the contrary, it eases the quiet burden of unconscious self-importance. If life can exist in other forms, then our failure to recognize them is not a defeat. It simply reflects the natural limits of our senses and our current tools. And in accepting those limits, the mind finds a very deep rest. No need to assert, no need to prove, only to remain open. There are rare moments in science when data does not deliver a clear answer, but instead hints at a fragile possibility. A chemical signature slightly out of place, a small imbalance in the atmosphere of a distant world. Not enough to conclude anything, yet not something that can be completely ignored. These signals are like a very soft breath in a quiet night. Not enough to awaken, but not gone either. And it is precisely this in-between quality that makes the story of life so well suited to the moments before sleep. Because sleep does not favor strong declarations. It prefers open questions, gentle spaces left unfilled. When the listener hears that scientists are listening carefully, cautiously, for the faintest signs, the mind learns another way of being, to exist without conclusion. This is very close to a light philosophy, where humans do not stand at the center to judge, but step slightly aside to observe. Not with sharp curiosity, but with calm acceptance. Somewhere in the universe, there are worlds that have existed for a very long time, longer even than Earth. They orbit old stars, whose light is gentle and steady, across spans of billions of years. The thought of these ancient planets carries neither romance nor sorrow. It carries a deep stillness. If life ever appeared there, it had immense time to try, to fail, to adapt, or to vanish without leaving a clear trace. And if it never appeared, that too is not a failure of the universe. It is simply one of countless possibilities that have been explored. Hearing about such vast stretches of time, the human mind naturally stops comparing. Personal worries, questions of meaning, grow smaller and lighter. Not because they are unimportant, but because they do not need to carry the weight of representing the entire story of life. Each human life, like each planet, is only a very short chapter in a book without a final cover. And in recognizing this, there is a quiet release. The philosophy here is not presented as a system of thought. It does not instruct how one should live or what one should believe. It simply suggests, very softly, that existing is already enough. That one does not need to know for certain whether one is unique in order to have value. That whether life is rare or widespread does not change the fact that it is happening here, now, in the moment the listener is breathing. There is something distinctly gentle in the way the story approaches this subject. It does not place humans at the center of the universe, but neither does it push them to the margins. It places us where we belong, as part of a larger process, where life is not the final goal, but an expression that can appear, change, and dissolve. Much like the metal clouds or reversed orbits described earlier. When listening about possibilities of life beyond Earth, the listener is not stimulated to imagine strange creatures. If images arise at all, they remain faint, because the purpose is not to visualize, but to feel openness. Openness to the idea that the universe is not designed to be easily understood, and that this is entirely acceptable. Openness to the idea that life does not need to resemble us in order to have meaning. And openness to the idea that we do not need answers to the greatest questions before falling asleep. In this state, humility is not a virtue to be practiced. It arises naturally when standing before timescales and spaces too vast to possess. It does not make us small in a negative sense. It makes us better fitted to reality. And this sense of fitting is essential for deep sleep because it allows both body and mind to stop forcing themselves to expand or contract unnaturally. The story of fragile biological signs and ancient planets does not lead to a conclusion. It does not say we are about to find life, nor that we never will. It simply implies, very indirectly, that the search may take a very long time, and that during the waiting, there is nothing wrong with living our small lives fully. This philosophy does not need a name. It is felt as a quiet background stillness. As the voice continues to drift, the listener no longer actively follows the content. Concepts of life, signals, ancient time blend together, becoming a single feeling that the universe is not in a hurry. It does not force answers. It allows uncertainty to exist for a long time. And if the universe can be that patient, then humans can allow themselves not to resolve every question before resting. Here, philosophy is not spoken plainly. It is carried by rhythm, by the absence of emphasis, by the refusal to conclude. It is like a very light thought passing through just before sleep. Enough to soothe the waking mind, but not enough to keep it awake. And within that gentleness, the listener begins to drift deeper, not into a dream full of images, but into a safe openness, where it does not matter whether life exists elsewhere or not. Because in this moment, life is already present, in the slow breath, in the relaxing body, in the awareness letting go of the need to assert. The story does not close this part with a grand question. It leaves only a very open, very humble feeling that there may be more than we know, or there may not be. Both possibilities rest comfortably within a universe wide enough to hold uncertainty. And when uncertainty is no longer treated as something to be solved, but as something that can be lived with, sleep arrives naturally, not as an escape from the question of life, but as a merging with the very flow of which life is a part. There are no declarations, no doctrines, only a deep calm, where philosophy needs no words, and where sleep can open gently, like a planet continuing its quiet rotation through the night, unobserved and perfectly at ease. Returning to bed. When the idea of life has become light enough to no longer demand answers, when humility before the universe has softened the last lingering questions, the story begins to turn back. Not with a sharp turn, but with a wide, gentle orbit, like a spacecraft after a long journey through space, slowly adjusting its course until Earth is no longer a distant point, but gradually becomes something familiar again. The universe does not disappear. It simply steps into the background, making room for another space, closer, smaller, and safer. In this moment, there is no need to look up at the sky anymore. No need to imagine distant planets, aging stars, or fragile possibilities of life. All of those have completed their purpose. They have expanded the mind long enough that now, returning inward does not feel like loss. On the contrary, it feels like coming home after a long journey, carrying with you a new stillness, deeper, slower, and more comforting. Attention naturally drifts away from distances measured in millions of light years and gently returns to the body lying still, not by command, not by control, but through a quiet recognition. You are here. The bed is holding you, silently. There's nothing more you need to do, nowhere you need to go, at least not in this moment. Your breathing, perhaps without you noticing, has already slowed. There is no need to follow it. No need to adjust it. Just notice that it continues on its own, steady, effortless, like a planet circling its star, without needing to be observed. Each inhale brings in a touch of cool air. Each exhale releases a small piece of the long day that has passed. There is no need to remember what that day contained. No need to hold on to any images. They have been allowed to dissolve, like distant light fading into the night. After being placed against the vastness of the universe, the body now feels lighter within its own size. The points where you meet the bed become more noticeable. Not sharper, just gently certain. A quiet assurance that you are supported, that there is no danger, no sudden movement, nothing waiting for you to react. Within this safety, the mind has no reason to tense. If thoughts still appear, they move slowly, like thin evening clouds, carrying no rain, blocking no sky. You do not need to push them away. You do not need to follow them. Just let them pass, knowing they no longer require your involvement. As with everything described throughout this journey, everything has its own rhythm. And the rhythm of sleep is an ancient one, deeply familiar to the body, even when the mind forgets. When conditions are quiet enough, safe enough, the body remembers. It knows how to soften each muscle group. It knows how to make the eyelids heavy. It knows how to let awareness drift backward without instruction. There are no grand promises here, no message you need to remember. Only one very simple, very human confirmation. You are safe. In this moment, nothing needs to be solved. The universe continues to operate. Planets keep turning. Light keeps moving, whether you are awake or not. You do not need to watch over the world. The world does not need you to do that. This return is not a narrowing. It is a gathering. Everything you have heard and felt now settles into the body as a deep, quiet background. It needs no images. Just the sense that everything is in its place, that nothing has been forgotten, that nothing needs to be carried into sleep except the feeling of rest itself. If there is one final image, it is very faint. Perhaps the softness of darkness after the lights are turned off. Perhaps the sense of space gently expanding until the room itself dissolves. You do not need to hold on to it. It appears only to guide you, then fades when it is no longer needed. The pacing now stretches longer. Sentences flow into one another, unhurried, like a piece of music slowing down, not by stopping suddenly, but by letting the final notes linger until they dissolve into silence. And in that silence, there's no emptiness to fear, only pure rest. You may notice your eyelids growing heavier, or the boundary between thought and sensation becoming soft and unclear. There's no need to name this, no need to stay awake. Sleep is not something to achieve. It happens when you stop standing at the doorway. The universe, with all its vastness and strangeness, has completed its role as a guide. It does not need to be close anymore. It remains there, very far away, very calm, a stable background. And you, in your small human body, are allowed to rest without carrying any larger meaning. In this moment, you are not an explorer of the universe, not a questioner, not someone who needs to understand or conclude. You are simply a body lying down, a consciousness slowing, a very small yet fully sufficient part of a vast world. And that is completely okay. There is no bell to signal the beginning of sleep, no clear boundary between waking and dreaming, only drifting, a gentle, familiar drifting, something that has happened thousands of times before, long before you ever knew how to name it. Your body knows this path well. You do not need directions, and if you have already fallen asleep without realizing it, this story does not need you to hear the ending. It does not require an audience. It only needed to do its work, to guide you to a safe place, and then quietly step away. And if a small trace of wakefulness remains, that is perfectly fine too. Nothing is wrong. There is no pressure to sleep right now. Just know that you are in the right place, at the right time, and nothing is urgent. Sleep will come, as it always does, in its own way. Now, there is nothing more to think about. No need to follow the story. No need to hold on to any images or ideas. Just let everything sink. Slowly, deeply, quietly. Good night. The universe will keep turning, and you are allowed to rest.